My name is Brad Baker, and this is my presentation for Torture and Intelligence Gathering in the War on Terror. The accepted definition of terrorism by the United Nations is an anxiety-inspiring method of repeated violent action employed by semi-clandestine individual, group, or state actors for idiosyncratic, criminal, or political reasons, whereby, in contrast to assassination, the direct targets of violence are not the main targets. The immediate human victims of violence are generally chosen randomly, targets of opportunity, or selectively, representative or symbolic targets from a target population, and serve as message generators. These are going to be violent actions against civilian populations generally to get the biggest effect. The global war on terrorism started on September 11th, 2001. 19 Islamic terrorists hijacked 4 passenger planes. 2 of those planes struck each tower of the World Trade Center, ultimately bringing both down. 1 struck the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and 1 crashed in a field in Pennsylvania after the passengers on board learned of the attacks and attempted to fight back against the hijackers. In the end, there was 2,977 victims killed in the attacks. Quickly identified the militant Islamic group Al-Qaeda and its leader Osama bin Laden as the main perpetrators of the September 11th attacks. President Bush stated that the enemy in the war on terror was going to be any and all radical network of terrorists and every government that supported them. Military forces, particularly special forces and clandestine military groups, were deployed to Afghanistan to destroy Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan that was harboring them. Forces were on the ground. They began capturing some high-value targets. They then scurried them away to various camps such as Guantanamo Bay and other places in country to start gathering intelligence from them about future terroristic plots and the location of Al-Qaeda leadership. This is called human intelligence. It is gathered from sources that either willingly or unwillingly provide intelligence services with information that may or may not be relevant, valuable, accurate, and ultimately actionable. And we want to put emphasis on unwillingly for the purposes of this presentation. How do you gather intelligence from an unwilling individual? And this is where torture is going to come into play. The Oxford Dictionary is going to define torture as the action or practice of inflicting severe pain or suffering on someone as a punishment or in order to force them to do or say something. Torture can be broken down into 3 primary categories. Interrogation, and this is to extract needed information in a timely manner usually. Functional, this is to impose authority and force subjugation. This may be your dictator who uses torture to establish their power. And then sadistic. This serves no purpose other than to give pleasure to the inflicting party. We're going to focus on torture for interrogation purposes. And the case against torture is going to be, it's illegal. 18 U.S. Code 2340A states that torture, it prohibits torture committed by public officials under the color of law against persons within the public official's custody or control. Torture is defined to include acts specifically intended to inflict severe physical or mental pain or suffering. So public officials could be military members, members of any organization within the U.S. government, CIA, FBI, things of that nature. The United Nations Convention Against Torture, which the U.S. did adopt and ratify, was a signing party. This states that no one shall be subjected to torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. It goes on to define torture as any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or confession, punishing him for an act he or a third person has committed or is suspecting of having committed, or intimidating or coercing him or a third person, or for any reason based on discrimination of any kind, when such pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent of acquiescence of a public official or other person acting in an official capacity. So, although it's a very long definition, want to focus on for torture for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession. I would also like to point out that at the end it says is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent of a public official. So we hear about things like CIA black sites in which we allow prisoners under our care to go into the care of another government who has more lax laws and rules against torture. So technically, even with the United Nations Convention Against Torture, we are not allowed to be doing that as well. So is there a case for torture? And the easiest way to explain or justify it is through moral justification. Harsh measures of interrogation, or what some would call torture, have been upheld by scholars and courts alike on the basis of legitimate self-defense in order to protect innocent lives. You could argue that it is self-defense, that these individuals are intent on causing death or serious injury to us, and we should be allowed to use such force to protect ourselves. When high-value targets are captured and when they are known to possess information vital to counterterrorism efforts, there is no moral limit to the amount and kinds of force that may be employed to extract information necessary to safeguard the lives and liberty of one's citizens. And in 1984, the Israelis had an inquiry or commission on complaints of torture by Palestinian prisoners during some conflicts they had back then. And they came up with what's called the ticking bomb test. In a nutshell, it basically states that if a person should have information that would give the location of a imminent threat to innocent or civilian lives, that harsh methods could be used and justified to extract that information, and that the information needs to be obtained in a very quick and prudent manner. And it comes down to a balancing act of moral and legal obligations. While you may find people on both sides of the argument, I, for one, believe that yes, torture in general is illegal, immoral, and should not be done. However, if the purpose of the torture had the clear intent of preserving innocent lives from an imminent threat, I believe that it is philosophically and morally excusable. To put that in context, in a way in which I believe anybody in society could understand, if a young child had been kidnapped and was being held against their will somewhere, and you found the person who did it, and they did not want to divulge the information or the location of that child, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody in society that wouldn't excuse harsh treatment of that individual to get that information. Again, it has to be a there has to be a balancing act, and you have to make the determination if the bad is necessary for the greater good. So in conclusion, I believe that torture in and of itself is wrong, but can be excused under certain circumstances. Thank you.